The 1970s and 80s weren't just about disco and arcade games. In animation studios across the world, a new wave of controversial cartoons was brewing. Bold, subversive, and sometimes downright shocking. These animated shows were censored for challenging authority, depicting violence too intense for Saturday mornings, or smuggling adult themes into children's programming. But they didn't just cause controversy, they revolutionized television forever. Let's explore the banned and controversial cartoons from the 70s and 80s that redefined animation history. Inch High Private Eye 1973. When Inch High Private Eye shrunk onto television screens in 1973, this miniature detective seemed harmless enough. Created by Hanna-Barbera, the series followed a 1-inch-tall private investigator solving crimes with his niece and dog. But beneath the whimsical premise lay unexpected controversy over child endangerment themes. The show regularly depicted the tiny protagonist in life-threatening situations, nearly being stepped on, attacked by household pets, and caught in dangerous machinery. Child psychologists criticized these scenarios for potentially traumatizing young viewers and normalizing dangerous situations. Episodes featured Inch High using surveillance techniques, breaking into private property, and gathering evidence through methods that critics claimed taught children inappropriate investigative behavior. Several educational networks refused to air reruns. Parent groups particularly objected to episodes where Inch High's size advantage was used for spying on adults, arguing it promoted invasive behavior. Despite controversy, Inch High influenced future animated detectives, paving the way for shows like Inspector Gadget. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids, 1973. No cartoon transformed notorious outlaws into Saturday morning heroes, quite like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids. Created by Hanna-Barbera, this series featured teenage versions of history's most famous bank robbers solving crimes with the same skills that once made them fugitives. Banned in several conservative markets, the show pushed boundaries by glorifying criminal expertise for heroic purposes. The animated series regularly showed characters wielding firearms, engaging in dangerous stunts, and using outlaw tactics to catch villains, all presented as heroic behavior. Parent advocacy groups were appalled by the message that criminal skills could be repurposed for good. The series faced restrictions in conservative markets, where stations refused to air episodes featuring gunplay during children's hours. Educational organizations criticized glorifying outlaws that law enforcement had once pursued. Yet Butch Cassidy broke new ground by blending historical figures with contemporary storytelling, paving the way for shows like Samurai Jack and Adventure Time. CB Bears, 1977. CB Bears rolled onto Saturday morning airwaves in 1977 during the Citizens Band radio craze, but this Hanna-Barbera series became controversial for promoting illegal activities disguised as children's entertainment. The show featured a trio of bears using CB radios to coordinate crime-fighting activities. The series depicted characters regularly breaking Federal Communications Commission regulations by using unauthorized radio equipment, broadcasting on restricted frequencies, and interfering with legitimate emergency communications. The Bears' casual disregard for radio laws concerned authorities already struggling with CB radio abuse. Episodes showed the protagonists evading police, conducting unauthorized surveillance, and taking law enforcement into their own hands, themes that parent groups found troubling. Several markets edited episodes to remove references to illegal radio activities. The controversy intensified when real CB radio operators complained that the show misrepresented proper radio etiquette and legal usage guidelines. Despite backlash, CB Bears captured the cultural zeitgeist of 1970s communications technology, influencing future animated series featuring technology-savvy protagonists. 4. The Groovy Ghoulies, 1971. Created by Filmation, this series featured classic movie monsters as rock musicians, but its casual approach to horror themes sparked intense debates. The show transformed Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman into comedic rock stars performing in a haunted mansion, complete with supernatural abilities that made religious organizations extremely uncomfortable. Episodes featured vampires, werewolves, and supernatural creatures presented as role models for children. Christian advocacy groups organized boycotts, claiming the series promoted demonic influences and normalized occult practices. Several Bible Belt television markets refused to air the series, while others moved it to late-night slots. The controversy was amplified by the show's musical segments, which critics argued used rock music to make occult themes more appealing to young audiences. Despite intense opposition, the Groovy Ghoulies influenced future animation by challenging traditional notions of good and evil in children's programming. 5. The Impossibles, 1966. When The Impossibles premiered in 1966, this superhero rock band seemed like harmless entertainment, combining two popular genres. Created by Hanna-Barbera, the series featured 3 musicians who transformed into superheroes to fight crime. But the show's dual identity concept sparked controversy among conservative groups concerned about youth culture corruption. The series depicted rock musicians as heroes, a concept that religious and conservative organizations found troubling during an era when rock music was associated with rebellion and moral decay. Episodes showed the protagonists using their musical instruments as weapons and their performance stage as a superhero headquarters. Critics argued the show promoted the rock and roll lifestyle to impressionable children, while normalizing the idea that entertainers could operate outside legal authority. Parent groups claimed the series encouraged children to view rock musicians as authority figures rather than traditional heroes. Despite backlash, The Impossibles pioneered the concept of multimedia heroes, influencing future series that combined entertainment careers with heroic identities. Rickety Rocket 1979. As the 1970s ended, Rickety Rocket blasted onto television with a space adventure featuring 4 teenagers and their robot companion exploring the galaxy in a malfunctioning spacecraft. Created by Filmation, this series became controversial for its portrayal of teenage independence and anti-adult authority themes during an era of increasing youth rebellion. The show featured teenagers operating dangerous space equipment without adult supervision, making life-or-death decisions, and regularly ignoring safety protocols. Child development experts criticized these scenarios for promoting reckless behavior and disrespect for adult guidance. Episodes showed young protagonists dismissing adult advice, operating complex machinery without training, and taking unnecessary risks that parent groups argued could encourage similar behavior in real children. The robot character often sided with teenagers against adult authority figures. Several educational networks refused to air the series, citing concerns about independence themes being inappropriate for children's programming. Despite opposition, Rickety Rocket influenced future animated series featuring young protagonists in adult situations, paving the way for shows like Voltron. Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch, 1974. Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch roared onto Saturday morning television in 1974 with a premise that immediately raised eyebrows. Anthropomorphic motorcycles engaged in constant conflict that critics argued promoted motorcycle gang culture and vehicular violence to impressionable children. Created by Hanna-Barbera, the series featured Wheelie, a good-natured Volkswagen Beetle, constantly pursued by a gang of malicious motorcycles called the Chopper Bunch. The show's regular high-speed chases, crash sequences, and aggressive behavior between vehicles concerned parent groups and safety advocates. The series aired during the height of public concern about motorcycle gangs and highway safety. Episodes featured reckless driving, intentional collisions, and vehicular mayhem that critics claimed could influence children's attitudes toward traffic safety. Several markets edited episodes to reduce chase sequences and crash scenes, while safety organizations criticized the series for making dangerous driving appear fun and consequence-free. Despite criticism, Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch influenced future vehicle-based animated series, paving the way for Transformers. Help, It's the Hair Bear Bunch. When Help, It's the Hair Bear Bunch escaped onto television screens in 1971, this Hanna-Barbera series about 3 bears constantly scheming to break out of their zoo seemed like harmless slapstick comedy. But beneath the cartoon chaos lay themes that made educators extremely uncomfortable: the glorification of escape attempts and disrespect for authority. The series followed 3 bears using elaborate schemes to escape their zoo habitat, complete with disguises, deception, and manipulation of their human caretakers. Critics argued the show sent troubling messages about respecting authority figures and accepting institutional rules. Episodes featured the protagonists lying to authority figures, destroying property, and treating their caretakers as obstacles rather than people deserving respect. Child development experts worried these themes could encourage children to view teachers and parents as adversaries. Several educational networks refused to air reruns, citing concerns about anti-authority themes being inappropriate for children's programming. Despite controversy, the Hair Bear Bunch influenced future animated series featuring rebellious protagonists and established templates for ensemble comedy. 9. The New Adventures of Secret Squirrel, Morocco Mole, 1978. When The New Adventures of Secret Squirrel returned to television in 1978, this seemingly innocent spy parody brought themes that made parents uncomfortable during the height of Cold War tensions. Created by Hanna-Barbera, the series featured Secret Squirrel and sidekick Morocco Mole engaging in espionage activities that critics argued inappropriately exposed children to adult themes. The show's spy scenarios, complete with secret weapons, surveillance equipment, and international intrigue, concerned child psychologists who argued that espionage themes were too sophisticated and potentially frightening for young audiences. Episodes featured characters using deception, infiltration, and combat techniques. The series aired during a particularly tense Cold War period, making its spy content especially sensitive. Parent groups worried that exposure to espionage themes could increase children's anxiety about international conflict. Several educational networks edited episodes to reduce spy-related content and focus on traditional comedy elements. Despite concerns, Secret Squirrel influenced future animated spy comedies and helped establish the parody genre. Battle of the Planets, 1978. No imported anime caused more controversy in 1978 than Battle of the Planets. This Americanized version of the Japanese series Gatchaman featured 5 young heroes in bird-themed costumes fighting alien invaders, but the extensive editing required to make it suitable for American children's television created a show that satisfied no one. The original Gatchaman contained intense violence, character deaths, and complex moral themes. When Sandy Frank Productions adapted it for American audiences, they faced an impossible task: sanitize an inherently violent show for Saturday morning television. The result was heavy censorship that removed graphic content while inserting robot characters. The controversy exploded when unedited footage began circulating, revealing stark differences between versions. Critics accused networks of cultural vandalism, while parent groups protested that even the edited version contained too much violence. Several U.S. markets pulled the series after organized protests about residual violent content. Despite editing disputes, Battle of the Planets opened American audiences to Japanese animation storytelling, paving the way for the anime boom. Star Blazers, 1979, it carried the explosive weight of one of the most politically sensitive animated series ever created. This space opera, adapted from the Japanese space battleship Yamato, featured a World War II battleship converted into a spacecraft, specifically the Yamato, Japan's most famous warship, sunk by Allied forces. The series followed the space battleship's crew traveling to save Earth from alien radiation, but the show's themes of military honor and wartime sacrifice struck different chords internationally. In countries that fought against Japan during Watsuwai, it was viewed as potentially propagandistic. The series was banned outright in several Asian countries that experienced Japanese occupation during Watsuwai. South Korean and Chinese broadcasters refused any version, citing Japanese military imagery and themes. Even the edited American version faced restrictions in European markets. Educational groups criticized both versions for complex moral messages about war and nationalism deemed too sophisticated for young audiences. Despite international controversy, Star Blazers introduced American audiences to serialized storytelling and animation, influencing modern animated series structure. Mazinger Z, 1972. When Mazinger Z stomped onto television screens in 1972, it unleashed more than giant robot battles. It triggered a global panic about violence in children's programming. Created by Go Nagai, this Japanese mecha anime featured unprecedented destruction levels and mechanical combat that left censors scrambling and parents horrified worldwide. The series followed Koji Kabuto piloting the massive robot Mazinger Z against Dr. Hell's mechanical beast army, but these weren't bloodless cartoon battles. Robots were dismembered graphically, cities were reduced to rubble, and characters faced genuine mortal peril in every episode. International broadcasters were caught off guard by Mazinger Z's intensity. The series was banned outright in several European countries for excessive violence. Where it did air, episodes were heavily edited, removing graphic destruction until they became nearly incomprehensible. Parent groups organized boycotts, claiming the show traumatized children and glorified warfare. Religious organizations targeted the series for violent imagery and perceived militaristic themes. Despite worldwide censorship, Mazinger Z established a foundation for the entire mecha anime genre, paving the way for Gundam and Transformers. Mogoko Meguchan, 1974. When Mogoko Meguchan cast its spell on television screens in 1974, this magical girl anime seemed innocent enough, a young witch learning to use her powers while attending school. But this Japanese series became controversial for introducing occult themes and witchcraft to children's programming during an era of growing religious conservatism. The series followed Megu, a teenage witch from the magical world learning to control her powers in the human world, complete with spells, magical transformations, and supernatural abilities that made religious groups extremely uncomfortable. Episodes featured witchcraft presented as positive and empowering. Christian advocacy groups organized protests against the series, claiming it promoted witchcraft and demonic influences to impressionable children. Several Bible Belt markets refused to air the series entirely, while religious organizations condemned it as spiritually dangerous programming. The controversy intensified when parent groups argued the show's positive portrayal of witchcraft could encourage children to experiment with occult practices. Despite religious opposition, Mogoko Meguchan helped establish the magical girl genre, paving the way for shows like Sailor Moon. Space Battleship Yamato, 1974. Before its American adaptation as Star Blazers, the original space battleship Yamato premiered in Japan in 1974, carrying themes so politically charged that it became one of the most internationally controversial animated series ever created. The show's use of Japan's most famous Jetsojui battleship as a heroic spacecraft created explosive diplomatic tensions. The series transformed the Yamato, a symbol of Japanese militarism that Allied forces had sunk, into humanity's salvation vessel, traveling through space to save Earth from alien destruction. For many countries that had fought against Japan, this resurrection of a war symbol as heroic imagery was culturally unacceptable. The show was immediately banned in South Korea, China, and several other Asian nations that had experienced Japanese occupation. These countries viewed the series as historical revisionism that glorified Japanese militarism. Even in neutral countries, broadcasters struggled with the series' complex themes of sacrifice, military honor, and nationalism. Despite international bans, Space Battleship Yamato became a cultural phenomenon in Japan and influenced the entire anime industry's approach to serious storytelling. Gatchaman, 1972. Before becoming Battle of the Planets, the original Gatchaman premiered in Japan in 1972, with content so intense that it would require massive censorship for international distribution. Created by Tatsuo Yoshida, this series featured 5 young heroes fighting an eco-terrorist organization, but its graphic violence made it one of the most heavily censored animated imports. The original series contained brutal combat sequences, character deaths, and environmental destruction that shocked international censors accustomed to gentler children's programming. Episodes featured realistic consequences of violence, including graphic injuries and permanent character deaths. When international distributors attempted to adapt Gatchaman for global markets, they discovered that nearly every episode contained content deemed inappropriate for children. Several countries banned the original series entirely rather than attempt adaptation. The controversy surrounding Gatchaman's content sparked international debates about cultural differences in children's programming standards. Critics argued that Japanese animation contained themes inappropriate for global children's audiences. Despite censorship challenges, Gatchaman's influence on action animation established templates for teen-based superhero narratives and influenced countless future series. Devilman, 1972. Created by Go Nagai, this Japanese anime was unlike anything children's television had witnessed, a brutal exploration of demonic possession, religious imagery, and apocalyptic themes that shattered every boundary of acceptable animated programming. The series followed Akira Fudo, a teenager who merges with a demon to fight Satan's army on Earth. But this wasn't typical superhero fare. Devilman featured graphic violence, disturbing transformations, and religious symbolism that caused worldwide outrage. The show's unflinching portrayal of demonic possession and biblical imagery was banned in dozens of countries. Many television networks refused to air it entirely. Several nations demanded massive edits that gutted entire episodes. Religious groups organized international boycotts, arguing the series was spiritually dangerous programming disguised as entertainment. The controversy was amplified by growing religious conservatism and concerns about occult influences. Despite massive backlash, Devilman became an underground sensation and revolutionary force in animation, helping pioneer the mature anime genre. Galaxy Express 999. When Galaxy Express 999 departed for television screens in 1978, the space-traveling anime carried philosophical baggage too heavy for most children's programming standards. Created by Leiji Matsumoto, the series followed a young boy's journey through space to obtain a mechanical body, but its existential themes about mortality made it intellectually controversial. The show explored complex philosophical questions about what it means to be human, featuring storylines about death, class warfare, and the price of immortality that critics argued were far too sophisticated for young audiences. Episodes dealt with suicide, social injustice, and moral ambiguity unprecedented in children's animation. Educational psychologists criticized the series for exposing children to existential anxiety and adult philosophical concepts before they were developmentally ready. Several international markets restricted the series to evening time slots typically reserved for adult programming. Religious organizations particularly objected to the series' questioning of human nature and spiritual themes, viewing it as promoting atheistic philosophy. Despite intellectual controversy, Galaxy Express 999 influenced future animation by proving that animated series could tackle serious philosophical themes. Future Boy Conan, 1978, as one of the most environmentally and politically charged animated series ever created for children. But its post-apocalyptic themes and anti-technology messages made it controversial among broadcasters concerned about frightening young audiences with dystopian futures. Created by Hayao Miyazaki, this series depicted a world devastated by war and environmental destruction, following a young boy surviving in the ruins of civilization. The show's realistic portrayal of ecological collapse and technological warfare was unprecedented in children's programming. The series featured themes of environmental destruction, nuclear warfare aftermath, and societal collapse that parent groups argued could traumatize children and create unnecessary anxiety about the future. Episodes showed abandoned cities, technological ruins, and the consequences of human environmental destruction. Several countries restricted the series due to its dark themes and post-apocalyptic imagery. Educational organizations criticized exposing children to dystopian futures and environmental catastrophe. Despite environmental controversy, Future Boy Conan became a landmark series that established anime's reputation for tackling serious social themes. G-Force blasted onto American television in 1986 as another attempt to adapt Japanese anime for Western audiences, but this version of Gatchaman faced even more controversy than previous adaptations due to its timing during peak concerns about television violence and unsuccessful attempts to sanitize inherently violent content. This adaptation featured extensive editing that attempted to remove graphic violence while maintaining action sequences, creating a confusing narrative that satisfied neither violence-conscious parents nor action-seeking viewers. The series became controversial for its editing approach. Parent groups criticized the remaining violence in the heavily edited series, while anime fans condemned the cultural vandalism of excessive censorship. The series faced restrictions in several markets where even the sanitized version was deemed too intense. Educational organizations used G-Force as an example of inappropriate adaptation, arguing that heavily edited violent content was more problematic than original programming designed for specific audiences. Despite adaptation controversy, G-Force contributed to ongoing conversations about cultural sensitivity and appropriate content standards in children's programming. The Pink Panther Show, Mr. Jaw, 1976. When The Pink Panther Show expanded to include Mr. Jaw segments in 1976, this underwater predator cartoon became one of the most unexpectedly controversial animated segments of the decade, sparking fears about desensitizing children to violence during the height of shark attack anxiety. Mr. Jaw featured a great white shark as protagonist engaging in slapstick comedy that often involved attempting to eat other sea creatures and occasionally humans. The segments portrayed the shark as comical, but underlying predator violence made parents uncomfortable, particularly following the cultural impact of Jaws. The controversy exploded when child development experts studied the psychological impact of presenting dangerous animals as friendly cartoon characters. Critics argued Mr. Jaw could desensitize children to real shark dangers, potentially leading to risky behavior around marine life. Several coastal television markets pulled the segments, citing community concerns where shark encounters were real possibilities. International broadcasters in Australia and South Africa banned the segments entirely. Despite backlash, Mr. Jaw's impact on animated comedy was significant, pushing boundaries of appropriate humor in children's programming. The Funky Phantom, 1971. The Funky Phantom materialized on Saturday morning television in 1971 with supernatural themes that made religious groups and conservative parents extremely uncomfortable during an era of growing concern about occult influences in children's programming. Created by Hanna-Barbera, this series featured teenage ghost hunters teaming with a Revolutionary War-era spirit. The show followed three teenagers who accidentally awakened a colonial ghost and his cat, leading to supernatural adventures that featured seances, ghostly manifestations, and communication with the dead. Themes that religious organizations found deeply troubling for children's entertainment. Christian advocacy groups protested the series, claiming it promoted spiritualism and occult practices disguised as innocent mystery solving. Several religious markets refused to air the show, while others moved it to time slots outside peak children's viewing hours. The controversy intensified when parent groups argued the show's positive portrayal of ghosts and supernatural communication could encourage children to experiment with seances and other occult practices. Despite religious opposition, The Funky Phantom influenced future supernatural comedy and helped establish the ghost hunting genre, paving the way for shows like Scooby-Doo, The Great Grape Ape Show, 1975. The Great Grape Ape stomped onto television screens in 1975 with seemingly innocent giant monster comedy, but this Hanna-Barbera series became controversial for its portrayal of destructive behavior and property damage that critics argued could encourage children to view destruction as entertaining and consequence-free. The series featured a 40-foot purple gorilla whose well-meaning actions regularly resulted in massive property damage and urban destruction, presented as harmless comedy. Episodes showed Grape Ape accidentally destroying buildings, vehicles, and infrastructure while his human companion cleaned up the chaos without consequences. Parent groups and educational organizations criticized the show's message that destructive behavior was acceptable if unintentional. Child development experts worried that presenting massive destruction as comedy could desensitize children to real consequences of property damage. The series faced editing in several markets where broadcasters removed scenes of extensive destruction, while educational networks criticized the show's approach to teaching responsibility and consequences. Despite criticism about destructive themes, The Great Grape Ape influenced future giant character comedy and helped establish templates for well-meaning but problematic protagonists. Hong Kong Phooey, 1974. Years before cultural sensitivity entered mainstream discourse, Hong Kong Phooey Kung Fu kicked onto Saturday morning television with martial arts comedy that seemed harmless, but became one of the most culturally controversial shows of the decade for its portrayal of Asian culture through outdated stereotypes. Created by Hanna-Barbera, this series followed a bumbling dog superhero fighting crime with karate chops and Eastern mysticism, but the show's humor relied heavily on Asian stereotypes. Hong Kong Phooey spoke in broken English with exaggerated accent, while episodes featured gongs, dragons, and fortune cookie wisdom. The backlash came swiftly from Asian American advocacy groups who accused the show of perpetuating harmful racial caricatures during a time of growing civil rights awareness. Several major markets pulled the series after organized protests, while international broadcasters in Asia refused to air it entirely. Educational organizations criticized the series for teaching children to view other cultures through stereotypical lenses rather than promoting genuine cultural understanding and respect. Despite its problematic elements, Hong Kong Phooey's influence on animation forced the industry to confront issues of representation and cultural sensitivity. The Mumbly Cartoon Show, 1976. The Mumbly Cartoon Show sniffed its way onto Saturday morning television in 1976, featuring a dog detective who seemed like harmless Hanna-Barbera fare. But this bumbling canine investigator became controversial for portraying law enforcement incompetence during a time of rising crime rates. The series followed Mumbly, whose investigations consistently resulted in chaos, property damage, and escaped criminals due to his bumbling methods. Episodes regularly showed the protagonist failing to solve cases and allowing villains to evade justice, themes that critics argued undermined respect for law enforcement. Parent advocacy groups criticized the show's message that police work was a joke during a period of increased urban crime rates. Educational organizations worried the show's portrayal of incompetent law enforcement could reduce children's trust in police officers. Law enforcement organizations argued that comedy portrayals of police incompetence were harmful to public safety and community relations. Several markets edited episodes to remove scenes where criminals escaped. Despite criticism, the Mumbly Cartoon Show influenced future animated detective comedy, paving the way for shows like Inspector Gadget, Jana of the Jungle, 1978. When Jana of the Jungle swung into Saturday morning programming in 1978, it brought problematic colonial baggage that modern audiences found deeply troubling. Created by Hanna-Barbera as a female answer to Tarzan, the series followed a blonde-haired American woman who becomes protector of an African jungle. The series depicted African tribal peoples through dated stereotypes, speaking in broken English, living in primitive conditions, and requiring rescue by the civilized white protagonist. Jana's role as jungle protector reinforced colonial narratives about Western superiority and the white savior complex. The backlash was swift. African American advocacy organizations condemned the series for perpetuating racist stereotypes and colonial attitudes. Several major television markets pulled the show after organized protests. These weren't just banned cartoons from the 70s and 80s. They were revolutionary experiments that pushed animation into uncharted territories of controversy, complexity, and cultural awareness. Each show challenged the established boundaries of children's television, whether through violence, cultural sensitivity, religious themes, or social commentary. Some were silenced by censors, others were transformed by editors, but none were forgotten. They forced the animation industry to confront difficult questions about responsibility, representation, and the power of animated storytelling. In their controversy, they found their purpose, reshaping television forever and establishing the foundation for the diverse, complex animated landscape we know today. If you enjoyed this exploration of animation's most controversial decade, like and subscribe for more stories the networks tried to hide.